Right, so welcome to Fundamentals of Music Theory. This is going to be number 3. So if you've joined us for the previous two, we covered the basics of music notation. In our first part, second part, we covered how to talk about keys and key signatures, things like that. So now we're going to expand on that even more, and we're going to get into chords and chord progression. So really getting into those basics of composing your piece. So in this workshop, we'll talk about chords. What are they? How do you form them? And then next we will talk about chord progressions. And then finally, we will talk about inversions briefly. All right, so first, here we have chords. All right, so what are chords? So, sorry, this disappeared from me. Right. So chords are a combination of usually 3 tones played at one time. So chords can have more than 3 notes played at the same time, but triads, as they're referred to, are going to be the most common ones, and they'll be the ones that we're going to talk about. When you play notes individually, so you just play A, B, C, any combination of notes in succession, but not directly at the same time, that's referred to as an arpeggio. So when you play, G, B, and D, play them down on the keyboard at the exact same time, that's a chord. But if you play G, B, D, one after another, that is an arpeggio. And this right here is, I forgot my guitar today, but this is showing you how you would play a C major chord on a guitar. So the 1, 2, and 3 refer to your fingers. So your pointer finger, your middle finger, and then your ring finger. So if you're holding the guitar, this would be the second string from the bottom. This would be the third string from the top, and then the second string. And then these here would be the frets. So this is how that is shown when you're looking at it on how to play it on a guitar. Usually for a piano, they're just going to show you like an octave on the piano, and it'll just be highlighted which keys you play. So let's talk about what kind of chords there are. There are many types of chords. What we're looking at here when we talk about major, minor, diminished, and augmented chords, this is referring to the qualities of the chords. So when a chord is, so we talk about major and minor scales. So major and minor chords come from those major and minor scales. So when we talk about C major is a major chord, right? When we talk about A minor is a minor chord. When we talk about a diminished chord and augmented chord, again, those are the qualities of the chord we're talking about. So it's how that chord is formed, which we're going to expand on in the next few slides. This is by no means exhaustive of the types of chords that there are. There are like suspended chords, seventh chords, and what those do is they just sort of affect that tonal quality of the chord. So a suspended chord, instead of having like a minor third or a major third, the way major and minor chords are, it's going to have a perfect fourth or perfect second. And that refers back to when we were talking about the scales. So like in C major, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, all of those notes are numbered by scale degrees. So that's what we mean when we talk about a perfect second or perfect fourth. So instead of C, E, G, the way you would normally do a C major chord, you would do C, F, G to play a suspended C major chord. So let's get into talking about more of how we form these chords. So a major chord. So major triads are made up of the root, major third, and perfect fifth. And then this is how you number all the major chords. So here we're showing the C major scale, but this goes for any kind of C major scale. So remember, for C major, we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then we come back to C. So in the C major scale, C is always going to be a C major chord. For D, and it's a little bit confusing. The diagram here shows all capital letters, but this is how you actually want to write it if you're writing out the chord progression that you're using. So when you see a lowercase letter or a lowercase Roman numeral, that means it's a minor chord. So D minor is going to be the second chord in the D major key, or sorry, the C major key. Then we have E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and then back to C major. And so we're numbering them again 1 through 7 the same way we're doing the notes in the scale. And then again, lowercase letters for the minor chords and uppercase for the major chords. And to help you keep this in mind, that to remember, it starts with the scale position. So if you were to start with D major, then you'd have a D major chord, and then you would have an E minor chord. So it's going to go in that same order that the scale goes, and then it's going to relate to whether or not it's going to be a minor or major chord. And a C major and the C major scale is going to be a C major, a C major chord is going to be the same regardless of scale. So if you're in a G major key and you have a C, you're going to play the same C major that you play in the C major key. So there's not like a special type of chord per scale. It's just these are how these chords are formed when they're C major or C minor, A major, and then that's the same no matter what key you're in. Okay. So next we're going to talk about minor chords. So minor triads, they're made of the root, the minor third, and the perfect fifth. Oops, sorry, let me go back. So this is when we're talking about a major chord, it has the root, major third, and perfect fifth. A minor chord is going to be almost the exact same, except for it's going to have a minor third. And the numbering for the minor chords for the key that you're in, it's the exact inverse of the major scale. So it's a minor first, minor second, major third, minor fourth, minor fifth, major sixth, and major seventh. Versus when we were looking at the major chord, it's major first, minor second, minor third, major fourth, major fifth, minor sixth, and minor seventh. And in a minor scale, to also remember this, if you're playing in the key of A minor, then that tonic, so that first chord, is always going to be a minor chord because you're playing in a minor scale or a minor key. Same thing for major. And then this right here is the A minor scale. And what you'll notice here too, so remember that C major and A minor, they're relative major and minor, which means that they have the same exact notes. So both of them have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, no sharps or flats. The order is just different. So for A minor, it's going to start on A and then go all the way back to A versus C started on C. But what you'll note here, and it would have been probably helpful if I had these on the same slide, but for all of the, like, which ones are minor, which ones are major, it's the same between the C major scale and A minor. So if you notice, we have A minor, B diminished, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor. When we look here at the C major scale, we see the exact same chords. And the reason why this is important, so you might think, well, if it's the same exact chords, then how am I going to know what, key I'm playing in? Why does it matter between the two? And it's going to matter when we start talking about chord progressions, which we will in the next part, because the chord progressions are going to be based off of these Roman numerals here. So a 1, 3, 5 chord progression is going to look different on a major scale or a major key versus a minor. Because for C major, a 1, 3, 5 would be C, E minor, G, versus for A minor, that would be A minor, C, E. So it's going to be different depending on which key you're in, which scale you're using, major or minor. So even though these are the exact same notes, the order of them matters. So this B diminished actually comes in at the second chord, the number 2 chord, versus being the 7th for the major scale. Okay. So let's talk about diminished chords. So we saw before that for both A minor and for C major, they have a B diminished chord. So all diminished chord is that has a root, a minor third, and a diminished fifth. Um, so major chords can't be diminished. Major chords will have to be augmented, which we'll see on the next slide. So sort of like a give you a heads up of what's coming next. So diminished chords are always minor. They always have a minor third. So you can make any minor chord diminished by lowering that fifth note a semitone. So remember, a semitone are notes that are right next to each other, and then a full tone is where they're separated. So if let me switch my camera really quick to, oh, sorry, it's the night of endless. Okay, sorry about that. The night of technical issues. So if we remember that a semitone, there are two notes that are right next to each other. So from B to C, that's a semitone. There's no note separating those two. But from C to D, that's a tone because we have either C sharp or D flat, depending on which way you're looking. We have that note in between them. So if we want to make a minor chord, a diminished chord, so say if we have a B chord, so it'd be B, D, and then F sharp. So to make a B diminished chord, like we see in the C major and A minor keys, is that we would lower it a semitone. So we have F sharp here. If we lowered it a tone, it would become an E. But since we're only lowering it a semitone to make it diminished, we're just going to go down to an F natural. So a B diminished chord is just B, D, and F, which makes sense when you remember that for both C major and A minor, they have no sharps or flats. So you can't have any chords that are going to use the black keys. So the chords we'd have C major, D minor, and so forth. So we would just be going down the keys, doing our root, I'm realizing it's flipped, but it's our root here, then our major third, and then our perfect fifth. And so then that makes a C major chord, C, E, and G. So it's really easy to remember on a piano because you're going to just kind of have a white key in between each finger. So I'm so sorry if it's not super clear or super easy to see. I know the keys are small. And for whatever reason, the camera is flipped. But it would be C, E, G to make a C major chord, right? And then to make that B diminished chord would be B, D, F, which would be different from the B minor chord, which would be B, D, F sharp. Is that confusing at all? Please feel free to ask questions.
Anna, we did get a question from
Oh,
James in the
okay. Is every chord in a major key?
Yeah, asking about how to form
yes.
major and minor. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I just saw it too. Yeah. Yes. So for major and minor, it's always the first, third, and fifth. It's just that when we talk about a major, and not key, sorry, chord, the major chord and minor chords. A minor chord has a minor third, and a major chord has a major third. But yes, but they're both formed with the first, third, and fifth. And again, that calls back to when we talked about every note in that scale. Yeah, so if we talk about the C major scale, right, with C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back to C. So we start on C, and we go to the third note in the C major scale. We go C, D, and then E. So our root is C, and then our major third is E, and then we would go 3 from E, which would be 1, 2, 3, and then we get G. So from C to E and E to G, they all have it's 3 intervals. So 1, 2, and 3. So they all have, so those are 3, yeah, so they're C to E is a third, and then E to G is also a third. So not necessarily C to G, but C to E, and then E to G. So that's how you want to think about it when you're forming it. Not the distance from the first note to the last one, but their distance to each other. So C to E, 1, 2, 3, three full tones. So we're not, we're counting the black keys as far as tones. So C to C sharp is 1 semitone, but C to D is 1 tone. So C to E, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then to go to G, 1, 2, 3. So then we have a C, E, G for our major chord. And then now when we go to D, still in the C major scale, we go D, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We get F, D, F. And then F, 1, 2, 3, A. So we get D, F, A. And then that's where we get our D minor chord. Does that make a little bit more sense? Okay, I'm glad. And it's definitely something that takes practice. And it's, so when we're kind of dealing with music theory, kind of to go back to the very first session where we just talked about kind of what is music theory. So music theory is kind of explaining the why and the how. So if you were to have no access to anything that could just kind of write down all of these chords for you, and you wanted to be able to figure out for yourself, well, how do I make these chords? How, why is this the way I do this chord? Why is this a diminished chord? All these types of things. So you could totally look up a list and say, okay, I want to write something in the key of C major, and it'll give you all the chords. And there's nothing wrong with that. What we're doing here is giving you sort of those building blocks to explain why you're hearing what you're hearing, so you know how to use the major chords versus the minor chords. And then to show you how to, I don't want to use calculate, that sounds very mathematical, but to sort of figure these out for yourself. And also let you know when you're playing something wrong. So if you remember when we were talking about keys and scales, when you're playing in a key, I don't want to say can't, because that makes it sound like there's hard and fast rules. But if I were to play a black key in succession with the white keys when I'm trying to play the C major scale, it's not going to sound right. That's going to sound like an off key, because remember our pattern, the tone, tone, semitone, like that kind of pattern for the major scale. If I don't go tone, tone, semitone, it's going to sound off. And you won't know why, if you don't know music theory, you're gonna be like, well, that sounds weird, but I'm not sure why it sounds weird. We're kind of going through the whys. So it's good to know this information. But if it's something that you don't remember off the top of your head after this, and you need to look up what all the chords are in these keys, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so again, just to recap, so the diminished chords, it would be like taking a minor chord, so like A, C, E, and then you're gonna lower the fifth key. So in an A minor chord, you would have A, C, E, A, C, E, and then you would lower the fifth by a semitone, so the E would become an E, E flat, sorry. So an A diminished chord would be A, C, E flat. So it just so happens, again, because we have this set of notes in the C major scale and the A minor scale, that a B minor chord goes from B, D, F sharp to B, D, F natural. No sharp or flat. So you're just, if you want to think about the scale of a piano, you're just going back one note exactly. So not skipping any black keys, not skipping any white keys, just going down one. And then, so we talk about an augmented chord, it's basically the reverse. So you're going to be raising a major chord a fifth. So if we go back to our C major chord, which is C, E, G, we would have the G note would be our fifth degree, or our fifth note. And then we would be raising it a semitone. So that G becomes G sharp. So then a C augmented chord would be C, E, G sharp. Okay, so now we're going to talk about chord progression. So any more questions just in general on chords before we start talking about chord progressions? Okay. So chord progression. So and let me switch my camera back. Sorry about that. Okay. So a chord progression is when we're playing one chord after another. So if I go from, C major to D minor to E or to E major, that's going to be a chord progression. And so all the chords that you use in your chord progression need to be in the key that you're playing in. So that's why knowing, what key you're in and deciding what key you're in is so important. Because based off of when we were showing that like 1, 2, 3, all those different like numbered chords, that's it. Those are the ones you have to work with, and that lets you know which ones are going to be minor, which ones are going to be major in the chord progression. So if you're doing a chord progression in A minor, you'll need to know which ones are going to be minor, which ones are going to be major. You can't have a D major in the A minor scale. That's not what it is. It's a D minor. So that's what's important to know your scales and to remember those patterns. And then, so again, so like in the key of C major, the chords that you can use would be C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. So here's some common chord progressions. This isn't the only progression that you can use, and there's so many different variations of these 6 anyway. And these are just 6 that I picked because they're kind of the easiest ones to have like examples of, and the ones that you'll see very often in like popular music. They're used across all different genres. So even though we have like on here 12-bar blues, you don't have to be writing a blues song in order to use a 12-bar blues. So starting from the top, so we have a 1, 1, 4, 5, so we're Roman numerals. So 1, 4, 5, so that would be using the, so remembering that scale, and again, it probably would have been helpful to have that on the screen as well. But if we're doing the 1, 4, 5, we will be doing C major, F major, G major. And the capital letters there, again, remember that those are going to be major chords. When we see lowercase letters here, that means minor chords. And even ones where we're showing the major here, if you wanted to do them in a minor key, you would just, again, this would be a minor 1 chord, so like A minor, and then it would be your minor 4th and then your minor 5th. But using it in the major key is just more common and more popular. And some songs that would use that would be La Bamba by Richie Valens, Johnny Be Good, Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry, and really almost a lot of songs. A lot of songs are written using that progression. It's very common. Your 5th chord here, this 5, that's referred to as like a dominant 5th. And it's very common to end your chord progressions with that dominant 5th. Either the dominant 5th or coming back to the tonic, to the 1 chord, because it just sounds resolved. It sounds finished. It doesn't kind of like leave you like wanting more, like what's going to happen next. So that's why it's so common to end on that 5. This one here, this uses, this is just a popular minor chord progressions. This would be a minor 1, major 6, major 3rd, and then a major 7. And I believe Stairway to Heaven uses this for its bass line. That's what this chord progression is. And then we have another minor chord progression here. We have a 1, 4, 5, and then we have a 7th, or sorry, a 5th chord, but it's a 7th chord, which we kind of briefly had talked about before. It's just another type of chord that you can use, and it can just kind of mix up from this regular 1, 4, 5 chord progression. So you can do all types of variations on these. So if you want to add, a 6 in here somewhere, if you want to rearrange them, if you want to do you know, 1 4 5 1 1, you know, kind of come back, maybe hit C twice, something like that. You can make variations on these. This is just sort of like that, like very basic chord progression. And most often in songs, these will repeat over and over again. And then kind of then you would go to another one, repeat that one a couple of times. So your chorus, your verse, your pre-chorus, things like that would have different chord progressions. So you could, you know, arguably use all three of these maybe in your same song. And this one here, so we have the 1 5 6 4 chord progression. This one's referred to a lot in one of its variations, which is the 1 6 4 5. So it's kind of just rearranging those same 5 chords. But it's referred to as the 50s progression. Sometimes it's also referred to me as like the doo-wop progression because it was super popular in the 50s. That's when it was popularized. Leslie Gore's You Don't Own Me uses that chord progression. Stand By Me is very famous for using that chord progression. It's like one of those super well-known songs that uses it. Dolly Parton's I Will Always Love You, as well as the Whitney Houston cover, is written in this chord progression here. So it's across all genres. So yeah, so it's not a thing where like this is a country chord progression or this is a rock and roll type of thing. These are just, here are the chords that you would use in this order. So it can be used for any key, and it can be used for any genre. For the 12-bar blues, yeah, it's common for jazz, but it's really kind of any genre. Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash uses a 12-bar blues progression, and it will sound bluesy because that's what our ears are used to hearing because we hear it so commonly in jazz music. But that doesn't mean that it's automatically a blues song if you were to use that in it. And you can also do an 8-bar or 16-bar blues. And what that means when we talk about like a 12-bar, 8-bar, 16-bar, it's actually a variation on the 1 4 5 where it repeats over and over again in this 12-bar block, essentially. So at times it's like 1 1 1 1 4 5 1 1 1. It just kind of repeats over and over again, and that would be the whole chord progression for the whole song. Hound Dog by Elvis uses it. Several Prince songs. Yes, so the lowercase, so anytime you see a lowercase letter when we're referring to, or lowercase numeral when we're referring to chords, that would be a minor chord. The capital 6 would be a major 6. That's for all of them. So this lowercase I is a minor chord. This uppercase I would be a major chord. And then this last one here, the 6 5 4 3. This is called the Andalusian cadence. It has some other names. It's mainly related to flamenco. Flamenco uses it the most often. That's kind of that like sort of like groove that it has is a flamenco sound, which is why it's referred to as the Andalusian cadence. I don't believe it was like started there or anything like that, but that's where it's popularized. So a lot of times when you look up chord progressions, like I said, these 6 are by no means the only ones you can use or the only ones that are out there. They're just really common ones. So you'll see, you know, things referred to as like so-and-so's canon or, you know, like this, you know, like the doo-wop progression, things like that. That doesn't mean that that's the only thing that it can be used for or who started it. It's usually just where that's where it kind of like took off. And that's what people still associate with it. So the 6 5 4 3, that kind of has its biggest association with flamenco. And so some other songs that like use it, Genie in the Bottle by Christina Aguilera uses it. And if you kind of think of that song, it does kind of have that like tango, Spanish kind of like energy to it. Hit the Road Jack by Ray Charles also uses it. So a lot of songs like that that kind of have that almost like dance, again, like flamenco, tango kind of sound to it. That's using the Andalusian cadence. So any questions on these? Okay. So then now you might be thinking, okay, well, simple versus complex. How complex do you have to make your chord progressions? It's really going to depend on what you want to do. And I know I say that all the time in all of these sessions, you know, it's up to you, but it really is. It's going to depend on the song. And you could have one song where you're repeating the same chords over and over and over again, having a single chord progression. So maybe it's just C, G, D, C, G, D over and over and over again. You can totally do that. There's like no rules against it. And sometimes you might not even notice. One of like the most famous examples of that is Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. Has these same chords that repeat over and over and over again. There's no variation in the chord progression, but it goes unnoticed because in the chorus, they have all these effects and everything that's going on with the guitars, and there's a little bit difference with the drumming. So it sounds almost like we've hit a new point in the song when really they're playing the same exact chords over and over again. So you can totally get away with it. The more simple your instrumentation is, so if you're just playing on piano or just playing on a guitar or something like that, it might be more obvious. It might, where people are kind of like, okay, well, this is getting kind of boring. This isn't really going anywhere. Your ear can kind of get tired. So if you are going to do a single chord progression, you are going to want to try to mix it up with your instrumentation. So maybe your guitar is doing the same exact chords over and over again, but you're doing a different piano melody or something, maybe, you know, an arpeggio on the piano while you're playing the same exact chords. And that'll kind of mix it up a little bit. And also if you're singing over it, kind of mixing up those melodies as well, where it's like, this is the chorus tune that I'm singing, this is the verse tune that I'm singing, that'll help a lot. Some other, well, on the next slide, we talk about more of those that have it. But Boston's More Than a Feeling uses the same chords over and over again. And then there's also, like as far as going with complex, you can make your verse, chorus, pre-chorus, post-chorus, bridge, all of that have different chord progressions, or you can just have variations between the two. So maybe you know that you want the building blocks of your song to be C, G, D. So you have C, G, D over and over again in the verses, but then when you hit the chorus, you add in an A minor. And that'll still kind of freshen it up and sound a little bit different, while still making the song kind of simple. And then again, anything else that you're doing over it, any like effects, any kind of like other instrumentation will kind of mix it up a little bit. But by no means do you have to have some complicated chord progression for every single part of your song. A lot of songs do not do that. Okay. So here we just have some examples, and since we started so late, I won't play all of these. So it's much better if we were started on time. Some I will play as far as the single chord progression, so you can kind of hear what that sounds like. So I have ones that are in the major keys and then minor keys. These are all examples of it. So for a 1, 4, 5, for a major key, we have Green Day's Time of Your Life, or Good Riddance. It kind of goes by like both names. That's written in the key of G major, and it uses these chords over and over again. The chorus does add a minor 6, and that's like the only difference. So that's kind of what I was saying before, is that you can kind of repeat the same chords, but if you mix up the order, if you add another chord in there, you know, in certain parts, it can kind of make it sound a little bit more interesting. That's one of those songs where when you're listening to it, you might not notice at first that it's playing the same exact chords over and over again. In the minor key, we have Aerosmith's Dream On, which is written in the F minor key. And this is one that definitely has a lot going on with it between the guitars and the piano intro that makes it sound really interesting, where you're kind of not realizing, oh, this is kind of just the same thing over and over again. With the major key for the 1, 5, minor 6, major 4th, and sorry, I should have put this in here, but for the Aerosmiths, well, all these minor ones, you would reverse this, so it'd be a minor 1, minor 4th, minor 5th. And for this, it would be a minor 1, minor 4th, major 6th, and then a minor 4th. So Journey is, it uses this chord progression here. It's in a major key. It's written in the key of E major.
And it almost kind of has like a 12 bar blues kind of thing going on, where it does the 1 5 6 4, but then it comes back around and does like another 4 6 5 and then back to 1. So that's another way to kind of make it interesting, is to almost reverse it. So you can keep doing that same kind of order, but then just kind of flipping it around. And that's what the piano was doing. The piano was doing this chord progression here. And the minor key, we have Justin Timberlake's Cry Me a River, which is written in the key of G sharp minor. So it's just G sharp minor, D sharp minor, E major, and then B minor, just over and over again. For the 12 bar blues, and the major key is Tracy Chapman, and that is an F sharp major. And then for the minor key, which is written in D minor, this is Fleetwood Mac's Black Magic Woman. Yeah, so those ones, again, they're just going, it's similar to this key here. So with the Fleetwood Mac one, it's just going between D minor, A minor, and G minor over and over again in that bluesy pattern. And then for the single chord progressions, this is the one that I was going to show, just so you can hear that it's the same exact thing happening, but there's a lot dynamically happening with the production that can make it sound interesting. So for the major key, we have Achy Breaky Heart by Billy Ray Cyrus, which is written in the key of A major. And the only chords he's playing throughout the whole song on his guitar are A major and E major, over and over again. Are you guys hearing it? You're hearing it? Okay. It's a little bit easier when you, especially when you're listening for it, to hear that it's the same chords over and over again. But he's singing kind of like a little bit different melody when he hits the chorus. The drums get a little bit more intense, you know, and then it's just kind of fun. So you kind of almost don't mind that it's the same thing over and over again. But yeah, major hit, his biggest hit. Totally got away with not even a, like most of these that I kind of mentioned on the other page were like 3 or 4 chord, in this case 12, you know, kind of chords repeating. That's the same 2. So you can totally get away with 2 chords over and over again. You might have to be Billy Ray Cyrus to get away with it, I'm not sure, but you can totally do it. Someone else who got away with it are the Beatles, and the minor key here. We have Eleanor Rigby, and this is written in the key of E minor. And there's a little bit kind of that's going on with other instruments in the song, but the whole song is built on E minor and C minor. So let's see. Like tedious to your ears because it doesn't really go anywhere. So kind of what they do with the song to make it just a little bit more interesting is sort of those different like instruments kind of going on. So you have the sort of like low kind of like violin sound, but then you have a little bit of those like higher pitches kind of going on. Just give your ear something else to listen to. But you know, I think maybe like 5 minutes of just that like low violin over and over again probably get kind of old after a certain point. So very different examples of very, very simple single chord progressions. But yeah, totally possible, very well known, but very popular songs that totally use those two. So yeah, so these are just single examples of all these. You can totally find a lot more. It's definitely much easier to find like songs that are in the major key if you're kind of like looking up like lists, if you're curious, if you want to kind of get ideas. Minor keys don't get the love they deserve just because they usually sound a lot more somber. Dream On, I guess maybe is one of those kind of like happier, more pumped up songs that is the exception to the rule, but almost kind of all three of these other songs are a little bit sadder than these three that we have up here, which are a lot more upbeat. Which is not to say that you can't write a sad song in a major key. You totally can, and vice versa. But most people kind of stick to that same kind of rule. Oops. Let me see if I can just. Okay, so next we'll move on to intervals. Any questions? Oh, let's slightly up one. Okay. When would you use a diminished or augmented chord? So we kind of talk about when you would use certain chords, and when we get into more of like the intervals, which we'll talk about next. But you're always going to use a diminished chord if that's the chord progression that you're using, depending on the key. So let me, if I can go back, without it making me play all these songs. Okay, so another ones that I chose had a, well, some of them have a seventh, but let me go back to, okay, so if you were writing a song in the key of C major and you were going to use the seventh chord in there, you would have to use a diminished chord. So in a major key, the seventh is always diminished, and in a minor key, the second is always diminished. So anytime you're doing a chord progression that's going to have those like numbered chords. So if you're doing like a 1, 7, 4, chord progression, that 7 is always going to be diminished. And if you're using a minor key, then if we did a 1, 3, 2 or something like that, that again, that 2 is always going to be diminished. As far as doing like, should I use a diminished or augmented? So it's going to sort of add a little bit maybe more complexity to the song if that's what you're wanting to do. Whenever we have all these different chord progressions and all these different chords, and we'll get into, and so I realize this says intervals, it's supposed to be inversions. But when we talk about inversions, all these different options for how to write your chords, how to play your chords, all of it comes down to how you want the song to sound. And if you're trying to sort of have a variety to the way that you're, like, say you're writing an 18 song album, maybe you don't want to have every single like song on that album to have a totally unique key. So maybe you want to have two E minor like songs that are both written in the key of E minor. Well, then you might want to use that diminished chord that you already have in that key, versus you might not have done that in the other song. And that's going to make that's what's going to make it sound different. And that's what's going to kind of make it where you're like, have I already heard this song on this album? So that's when you want to use one chord over another. But yeah, there's no wrong way. You never have to if you don't want to. But that's sort of how I would use it if I was trying to add some variety to the songs that I was composing, is to, again, lower that half step, raise that half step, and it's going to sound different. It's going to sound interesting. Any other questions on chords or chord progressions? Cool. Okay, so we'll talk about inversions, not intervals. We already talked about intervals. Okay, so an inversion. So inversions, so this is showing you here kind of what inversion would look like on one chord. Does anyone remember our scale notes for the treble clef? Does anyone know what chord this is?
Is it a C?
It is a C major. our tried and true example in music theory. It is a C major chord. So we have a low C, and then remember every good boy does fine, so we have an E note here, and then every good boy, so we have a G note here. And then the spaces, it spells face, F-A-C-E. So all of the chords we've talked about so far, remember they're triads, so triad meaning 3 notes per chord. All of those, we've been talking about them in root position. So as we can see here, the root position for C, we have C, E, G. So when I was talking earlier, I was like, well, that's a C major chord. They're all, thirds from each other, C, E, G. That's a C major chord. A C major chord needs to have a C, an E, and a G. And that's kind of where it ends with what it needs to have to be considered a C. So what an inversion does is it can kind of make a just boring old root position, plain old triad, kind of a little bit more interesting. So how you do inversions, and this is how you would invert it for any chord that we're talking about, is that this note down here, the tonic, this is going to be kind of the one that we're moving around. So again, remember F-A-C-E, and in first inversion, you're going to leave your third and your fifth where they are, but you're going to move your tonic or your root note above your other notes that are down here, which that means that your E or your third, your major third, becomes the lowest note. It becomes the bass note. Does that make sense before we go on to the second inversion? So you're moving the C above it, and you only need to move it just at the top of the other notes. So this is still the same notes, C, E, and G, but instead of the C being down here where we've added a line so that way it can be lower than the staff because our staff starts here at E, we've raised it up and now it's higher in pitch. So unfortunately in our many technical issues, the electric piano is not working, but instead of playing, let me switch back to the other camera. Okay, so instead of playing the C, E, G in this way, which is how you played in root position, what this becomes now is that E is our lowest note, which means that's where my first finger starts. So rather than C, E, G, I'm still going to play all of those notes, but instead I play E, and then my second lowest note is going to be my G, and now my C is that highest note. And then what this is referred to, another name for it, would be C over E, which that would be written as like C/E, so like a fraction. So if you're ever looking up like guitar tabs or piano tabs, anything like that where you're looking up how do I play this song, and you see something that has like F over A or A over C, what that means is that it's an inversion. So you're still playing the same notes. I'm still playing C, E, and G, but my order is different. So on a piano, that means that my lowest note, so that first note, so remember on a piano, I'm so sorry, it's mirrored, but this is my low end over here, and these are my higher notes. So this C is much higher than this C over here. So when we play a C, E, G in root position, your C is always the lowest note. And that's what we're showing here on the staff, is that anything, especially below the staff, is going to be way lower than anything above it. So in root position, C, E, G, C is our low note. In first inversion, our C becomes higher than both our major third and our perfect fifth. And so then we have E, G, C. Okay? So then when we go into second inversion, that's when we now bring our major third or your minor third above the, so basically first inversion comes before second inversion. Now you wouldn't have to like play this first and then play that. It doesn't mean that, but it means that a second inversion is like quite literally an inversion on this first inversion here. So as you can see, our C is not back down here at the bottom. Our C is still up here, so F-A-C-E. And then we've moved our E, which was our previous bass note. We moved our E above the C. And so now our C is up here. So remember, our E, because we have F-A-C-E. So we're playing here we start with G, and then we play C, and then we play E. So a little confusing if you have forgotten that the way the staff works is we're going up in pitch rather than going down. So G becomes our bass note, then B, then E, or sorry, C, then E. And I wish that this was working so I could show you how that sounds. So it's playing the same notes. So in your mind, you might think, well, if I'm playing C, E, and G regardless, then what's the point, or what makes the difference? And what makes the difference is going to be that this becomes that lowest note. So when you're listening to a regular, or like, not I want to say regular, a root position C major chord or any kind of chord, that C is going to be lower. And that's going to give something different to your ear than the G being lower. And so while it's the same notes, you're not losing anything. What you gain is just a little bit difference and like that quality of the chord. So you're still getting your C, E, G, so there's no difference there, but just what you're getting a tonal difference, because before this G was higher in pitch than the C. And now that's not the case. Now it's the lowest note. So especially if you played this in an arpeggio, you did the G, C, E without holding them down as a chord, that would sound different than this low C, E, and this higher G. So that's how you do a first inversion and second inversion. And then this one would be referred to as C over G, because C, which is our root note, it's over what our bass note is C over G. So if you did a D minor chord, right, which is D, F, A, and we moved our D where A was the lowest note, then that would be referred to as D over A. Because so you would think of that as a fraction, the A being the denominator, that's going to be what your bass note is, your lowest note, and the numerator is going to be that tonic, that root note that's being moved. So this is C over E, because C is our root note and E is our bass note. This is C over G, because G is our bass note and C is still the tonic, it's still the root note. So this goes for any chord that you're making an inversion of. And so lastly, we're going to talk about why we would use an inversion. So the use of inversions, like I said, you're not losing anything when you're playing it, because you're still going to be playing those same notes, but it can make things interesting, and you're not losing quality. So if anything, you're either gaining or kind of just even. So for example, if I were to play, where C over G is the G, C, E. And that can almost look harder to play, right, than C, G. But these are much closer together than G, C, E. The thing about if I were going to play a chord progression that was C, G, F. So if I were to play that with all of those in root position, I would play C, then I come all the way over here and play G, and then come back and play F. But if I were to play that second inversion, C over G, then I would play my C chord here, my C over G. Then all I have to do is move my fingers up 2 notes. My hand never moves. So C over G, G major chord. And then I just move 1 up and I have an F major chord. And tonally, you're still going to get the same thing you get out of doing this to here without hardly moving your hand. And it can just kind of make your progression sound a little bit more interesting. Like I said, if you're, composing a lot of things, maybe in C major and A minor, because they're easier to play on the piano, well, using these inversions, they can make things a little bit interesting. And then they, again, can make it easier to play if you're new to it. So those are kind of the benefits of using it. So you don't lose anything by using the inversions, and there's no right or wrong way to play it. And so that was kind of all I had. We ran almost exactly an hour from when we started. Were there any questions on anything? Again, I appreciate so much everyone hanging in there. Well, we ran over almost exactly half an hour. Yeah, any last questions? Again, next week is going to be our last one, and hopefully free of technical issues. But we're going to talk about just kind of putting it all together. So we're going to talk a little bit about harmonies. So kind of like, here are the chords we're playing, but here's that melody we're playing over it, kind of like a, you know, your bass and your melody, kind of bringing all of that together, talking about that. And also show you some ways, some like software that you can use at home if you are still not wanting to come into places, or if you want to come into Creative Experience to start working on your songs. We'll have a lot of information for that for you guys next week. Awesome. Well, if there's no questions, I will not hold you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.